All right, guys, we are back with Genesis chapter 7. And as we've looked before, Genesis chapter 6, God had identified Noah as the man that found grace in his eyes. And I love that. The world was getting super violent, super wicked continually, the Bible said, and yet Noah found grace in his eyes. And so God tells Noah in Genesis chapter 6 how to build the ark. And then when Genesis chapter 7 comes around, it's time for the animals to board and everybody to get on that ship because the flood is coming. So it starts out, Genesis 7:1 says, "And then the Lord said to Noah," and I just love that because God through this whole process is talking to Noah. He's not leaving him in the dark. He's instructing him. He's comforting him. And I like what my grandpa said when God said, "Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I've seen that you're righteous before me in this generation." God was inviting him to come into the ark because God's presence was in that ark with them. And I like that. God's presence is here with us. God promises to never leave us, never forsake us, that he's always right by our side in the hard times, the easy times, difficult times, and happy times. All times, God's presence is with us. And again, Noah stands out for his heart for the Lord. And, Noah had a lot of faith in God. He was hearing from God, and then he was doing what God had told him. And God saw that. And, when we have that faith to believe what God says and we act accordingly, God is blessed. As well as in Genesis 7:5, it says that Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. And Genesis 7:9 says, as God commanded him. And so again, and it says in 16 too, as God commanded them. So you see this obedient Noah in this difficult time, obeying God. God's presence is with him. And he's listening, he's doing, and when we believe that stuff, we're going to be doing what God says. We have an active faith, a living faith here as Christians. And so what happened? So, it's so funny because one of the other verses that I like is verse 2. It says, "You shall take," God is speaking to Noah, "you shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, male and his female, 2 of the animals that are unclean, a male and his female, and also 7 of each bird of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth." So Noah's job was to keep these, God was going to bring the animals in, and Noah was going to watch them and help preserve them until God was going to release them back onto the earth after being in the ark. But what I love about here is it's constantly saying male, female. And it's on this one, it says male and his female. And I like that. Just as like, yeah, you have your man, you got your hubby. Yeah, you're the wife, you're his wife, it's special. But anyway, so they went in 2 by 2 to the ark, but it wasn't that there was only 2 of every kind of animal. But I like the fact that God said, hey, bring 7 pairs of the clean animals. So we have a lot more clean than we do unclean, right? So it was going to be 7 of each, every clean, male and female. So 7 of these, and then 2 of the unclean. And so 7 oftentimes in the Bible is a number of completeness. So here God's like, I'm going to keep this species alive on this earth. We're going to bring 7 of them, 7 pairs of them, and they're gonna come on into this ark, and so that they would be kept alive. And so the rains came, and but before they did, they got in the ark, and it said in verse, this is what I really like too, 7:16, "And so those that entered, male and female," so it was Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives, and then the animals. And it says, "All they that entered in, male and female of all the flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in." So here the Lord says, come on in the ark, and then the Lord shut that door. So, here even Noah gets like a supernatural thing that the animals are coming to him. Noah had to go get the food and prepare food for them, the animals, but they came, and then God shut the door on the ark. You're like, whoa. And then it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And verse 11 tells us and gives us an idea of how cataclysmic this event was. So cataclysmic that, it can explain so much of the disruption in our earth today, as far as of fountains of fossils found up in these mountain areas and all this kind of stuff. So in the scientific zones of study in mountains and different things, you see fossils that are high up, and you're like, how did that get up there? Well, the flood is such an answer to the mysteries of what some say of how did this happen in science. The flood explains a lot. They even think that maybe even with the flood, as we'll get to in a minute, actually caused maybe an axis tilt from all the water that was displaced on the earth. And so in verse 11 tells us, it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, Noah was 600 years, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened up. And then it rained upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So back when God created the earth in this beautiful state, I mean, I think every time I think of that, what it'd be like Hawaii, like a perfect environment to just be in, and just beautiful and just lush. Things grow so big and wild, and it's so beautiful. Well, it was because God had put a canopy of water over the earth. So, and then it says in the Bible, I think in Genesis 1, that the waters came up from underneath. So it was kind of like its own personal sprinkler system, but the waters were up, coming from underneath the earth. So you have this great canopy dropping down, so much so there's 40 days and 40 nights of water rain. That's a lot. If any other thing would rain for 40 days and 40 nights straight, I don't know how it would survive this earth. But it's because there was a huge water canopy. And then so the fountains underneath were broken up, and then the water from the top. So what it's getting like is this pressure of this water system coming up and coming down on the earth, which could have possibly is what made the mountains just like shoot up. Because anytime you have some kind of displacement of water and there's pressure that's formed and stuff like in the inner cracks of the earth, and it shifts the earth around. So this is what, why we think that that's when the mountains, really the big mountains, like formed, because of just this upheaval, and the earth was just changing so greatly at this time. So you guys can do more investigation on it, but I always thought, it's an interesting thing that here back in Genesis chapter 6, God says, I myself am going to do this. He says, but I'm going to make my covenant with you. God allowed this to happen. And it just shows the earth is God's, as far as he made it. We're his creation, and our job is to follow him and what he wants. And he has free reign to do whatever he wants with this earth. And he's God, and so it just shows you the magnitude of how severe this earth was. And God says he lets the sin rise to a point, but then he brings the wrath and brings the judgment. And same thing as we remember in the New Testament, says, as the days of Noah. And here it is that sin had just reached its limit, and God used, the earth to bring about that judgment. And so he will too in Revelation, when he talks about so much. He said, we're going to hear his covenant in the next chapter, but this one was of water, but the next one is going to be of fire and even harder and harsher things. So, in verse 23, it says he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both male and cattle, creeping things, bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth, and only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. Verse 24. And the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. So pretty crazy. We had so much water, so much cataclysmic events going on with the earth and its crust, and just transforming the earth basically into something probably so unrecognizable when the waters finally receded. It took it 150 days for the waters, to find a place to go, so it's just amazing to know that God presided over this whole entire thing, and yet kept his creation, the one that followed and trusted him, alive for this time. And so, when we look at the story of the great flood and of Noah building that ark, I just can't help but think, of how much God is in control of all things. This earth, like I said, he created, it's his, and he can do whatever he wants with it. But again, we're reminded of Noah, and his faith in God to hold on to the promises and what God has said to get him through to safety. And today too, as we walk in this earth and with so much going on, these radical changes that we've seen in America, and now we're seeing globally, as well. We got to hang on to God's promises even more, and in the last days, the Bible says there's going to be scoffers and mockers, but that's just a sign that he's coming soon. So prepare your hearts for the coming of the Lord. Talk to him, let him encourage you, and let his word just speak to your heart today. So I hope that blessed you. So chapter 7 is the great flood, and we'll continue on this journey. All right, God bless you.